Welcome to the NancoVerse. It's the 20th of June 2022 and yesterday was Father's Day. I hope everyone wished their fathers, and the people who don't have a father, just become your own, dude. Sometimes we need to find inspiration from the people around us, although sometimes we need to find inspiration from within. Any of these days, Mother's Day, Father's Day, even Diwali, Christmas, any of the days when people are celebrating with their loved ones, sometimes we forget that there are people that don't have them around them. There are days when everybody else seems to be, having a normal time, but you're suffering because you do not have that same level of intimacy with your father, for that matter. A lot of young men, a lot of girls as well, they have problems with their fathers and they don't have good communication, or there are so many interpersonal relationship problems that people do suffer from, and maybe that's one of the silver linings of these days. Like on Father's Day, you can re-establish a communication with your father if it's not going well. Like at the end of the day, they took care of you when you were a kid. I mean, it's so personalized, like there are so many people who have these unique experiences with their parents, and parents have a unique relationship with their kids as well. Growing up, there was a lot of discussion about who's the favorite. We'd always ask, like I have two elder sisters, and that was always the debate, like who is the favorite kid, for the mom or for the dad. And I genuinely personally feel that my dad likes my eldest sister the most, because she is, she turned out the best, dude. But yeah, maybe that's my insecurity talking. Anyway, happy Father's Day to all fathers out there. Thank you for raising children. And fathers are important, dude. Like, we need fathers in society. We need people who are that figure in someone's life that somebody can go to and seek advice from and seek guidance from. Fathers are that figure in most people's lives. And sometimes there are father figures for people who are not even fathers. Like, I would have a father figure, but he's not my father, but I would treat him as a father figure, because that person mentors me, he guides me, he's able to give me that perspective from older man's perspective. Sometimes we need an older man's perspective, especially a lot of young people. We kind of think in the present times, we don't really have that same experience that older people have in life, and that's where it can come really handy to talk to somebody who's a little older than you, and they can give you a different perspective on your life. So yeah, a lot of things happening in the world as well. A lot of things happening in India. Like as you guys might know, the defense, the military establishment and the government have come up with a new recruitment system called AgniPath, something that I will be covering. It's the day 4th of massive protests that have turned violent. Trains have been burned, property has been vandalized, young men are on the streets vandalizing and breaking stuff, and this is, I personally feel it's completely unacceptable. The specifics of the scheme I will be getting into. However, if any young person is listening to this, it's a moment of reflection for everyone, because anytime something new is rolled out and it doesn't serve our own purpose, we kind of gather together and try and destroy things around us. Let's not destroy things, because at the end of the day, we all have to pay for this infrastructure. We have to pay for that train that is being burnt. And with something like a policy by the army, there is a very high likelihood that it's not going to be looked at. Yes, there might be some changes in the policy. However, the army going back on its point is not happening. And there are a lot of positives about AgniPath as well, which we will get into. There are negatives that, yes, obviously there's no pension and all of those things. However, I feel if you want to join the army just for pension, then that's not the organization you want to be joining. And I can say this at least from a point of view of, somebody who has had the experience of living with army officers, and, yes, they did get pensions by the end of their service. However, that's not the main goal for a person who joins the army. No rollback. Agniveer aspirants must pledge they weren't among protesters. Military blames protests on inimical elements, quote, and coaching institutes, tells protesters not to waste time. So this is a statement from the army that I'd like to read out to all my listeners. Irrespective of the continuing protests across the country, the AgniPath scheme of recruiting soldiers for 4 years will not be rolled back, and aspiring Agniveers will have to, quote, pledge that they did not take part in the protests, arson or vandalism, the leadership of the military said on Sunday. The military had been trying to carry out this reform for decades, and the coronavirus pandemic had provided the opportunity to do it. Tribe Services Lieutenant General Anil Puri told reporters. He accused coaching institutes of instigating the protests and advised protesters not to, quote, waste time and to instead focus on preparation for the tests. All three services will begin training their Agniveers by November-December this year. With no let-up in the protests for the fifth day running, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh met the service chiefs for the second time in 2 days. Army Chief General Manoj Pandey, Navy Chief Admiral R. Hari Kumar, Air Chief Marshal V. R. Chaudhary had met Singh on Saturday as well. Lieutenant General Puri, Additional Secretary, Department of Military Affairs, addressed the media in a press conference a few hours later, along with top officers for personnel in each service. Those who were participating in the protests would not be recruited, Puri warned. Quote, military is based on discipline. There is no space for arson or vandalism. Anger can be expressed, Puri said, but peacefully in discussions. The protesters, he alleged, had been, quote, instigated by two kinds of people, inimical elements and those who run coaching institutes. The latter group, he said, have a, quote, huge contribution in sending them to protests on the street. Every individual who wants to join Agniveer will have to pledge that he has not participated in the protests or vandalism, Puri said. Police verification is mandatory. Even in the existing system, he said, those who were named in the FIRs would not be able to join as Agniveers. Quote, I request the protesters, do not waste time. Qualifying in the physical tests is not easy. Aspirants, Puri said, have 45 to 60 days to be, quote, physically prepared before the recruitment starts. Many of the protesters were anyway older than the eligibility ceiling, Puri said. The military had not anticipated the magnitude of the protests, he said. As it is, quote, not our job. The protesters are an issue of law and order and someone will tackle it. Our military's aspiration is to bring change, Puri said. Several reports have recommended a younger military since 1989 to instill youthfulness. This was our aspiration. Not done because someone said it. The pandemic offered an opportunity to introduce the policy. Nature or God gave us the opportunity in the form of COVID-19 pandemic to carry out the change that the military had been trying since 1984. The pandemic was least painful opportunity. Asked if the policy could be rolled back, Puri said, no. Why should there be a rollback? Terms and conditions released by the Army on Sunday, as well as a detailed document published by the Air Force earlier, said that the, quote, Agniveers would form a distinct rank in the forces, different from any other existing rank. Also, quote, to encourage and recognize dynamism of youth, a distinctive insignia will be worn by Agniveers on the uniform during their engagement period. The Agniveers will be eligible for only 30 days leave in a year, a third of what troops get in the existing system. They will not be allowed to leave the services before 4 years. Lieutenant General Puri mentioned that even those who had cleared some stages of recruitment in the last 2 years, whether physical or medical, would have to reapply under the new policy, as all recruitments would happen through AgniPath. Puri said that the government's announcements regarding reservations for Agniveers in the Central Armed Police Forces, Assam Rifles, Coast Guard, Defence Public Sector Undertakings, and other departments had been planned in advance and were not a response to the protests. I think this is very important to highlight because a lot of people have been saying that the government is coming out with concessions ever since the protests have broken out. However, Lieutenant General Puri has said that the government's announcements regarding the reservation for the Agniveers in the Central Armed Police Forces, CAPF, Assam Rifles, Coast Guard, Defence Public Sector Undertakings and other departments had been planned in advance and were not a response to the protests. The only change done by the military was the one-time age relaxation to give a chance to those who had missed out in the last 2 years during which the pandemic had prevented recruitment, he said. The Kargil Review Committee report had mentioned that, quote, a large number of Jawans are there in their 30s and officers are getting to command much later in the past, Puri said. The age factor has become worrisome. The military needs a youthful profile. The military needs a youthful profile, said Puri. The policy was studied for 2 years under the country's first Chief of Defence Staff, the late General Bipin Rawat, and the 3 services chiefs who are now retired. Models of the other countries were studied as well. In all countries, it was seen that the average age in the military was 26 to 28 years, and almost all countries had, quote, multiple entry and exit avenues. Youth were preferable because they can take more risks and have junoon and jazba, passion and emotion. He said AgniPath would bring down the sepoy to non-commissioned officers ratio from 1:1.28 to 1:1, improve the teeth to tail ratio of the forces, and bring an ideal mix of youthfulness and experience. While 50,000 to 60,000 would be recruited annually over the next 4 years, this number will be ultimately increased to 90,000 to 1.2 lakh, Puri said. Training infrastructure will need to be enhanced. The officers in charge of personnel in the 3 services announced the schedule for the recruitment process. The Adjutant General of the Army, Lieutenant General C. Bansi Ponappa, said the draft notification would be published by Monday. Registration should begin at all centers by July 1 and rallies would begin in first half of August. The induction for training will happen in 2 lots. After rallies are held from August to November, in the first lot, 25,000 Agniveers will be inducted and the training will begin in the first or second week of December. For the second lot, the training will begin in the first half of February 2023. Approximately 40,000 Agniveers will be recruited by the Army through 83 rallies this year. All states will be covered. We will endeavor to touch every last village in the country, Ponappa said. The Navy's Chief of Personnel, Vice Admiral Dinesh K. Tripathi, said the advertisement would be issued by June 25th and the process would start online. So, AgniPath is here to stay, and protesters are still on the streets burning trains and destroying infrastructure. Vandalism, arson is on at this point. If this podcast can make any request, any appeal to people who are listening, young people who are listening, do not support this. Do not support this sort of behavior from the public which destroys the infrastructure that we have, because anyway we're a backward country and we need the infrastructure. We do not need more trains to be burned. It's just an humble appeal from my end that your protests might not lead to anything, but it will definitely lead to the destruction of the economy and also of the fabric of this nation. And the Indian Army knows what it's doing, man. Like, the Indian Army really, is one of the most tactical organizations in the world, and whatever decisions they make, they think of it before they implement it 100 times. And we all know that the pension and salary bills of the Indian Army, military in general, are quite high, and the economy also has to be factored in. Is it good or bad? Only time will tell. However, in this particular point in time, let's maintain peace. Moving on, I would like to bring my attention to a story which I feel is not getting the attention that it deserves. There is a flood situation that remains extremely grim in Assam. Guwahati, one of the largest cities of Assam, is almost submerged, and the residents over there are facing a lot of troubles. This is a story in the Assam Tribune by PTI, and it goes this way. The flood situation in Assam remained extremely critical on Sunday, with many new localities coming under the impact of the deluge in several districts of the state and overnight incessant rains in the state. According to the latest updates by the Assam State Disaster Management Authority, the state was witnessing floods and landslides for the last 6 days, leaving behind a huge trail of destruction everywhere. In the last 24 hours, 32 districts comprising 118 revenue circles and 4,291 villages have reported flooding, it said. Around 31 lakh people have been impacted. That's a lot of people. 31 lakh, that's 3 million people. have been impacted, and 1.5 lakh of them have taken shelter in 514 relief camps across the state. Relief materials were also distributed among people who are affected by the floods and have not taken shelter in relief camps. At least 302 relief distribution centers or points opened temporarily. The National Disaster Response Force has been helping the district administrations evacuate people from the flood-hit areas. So far, 20,983 people have been evacuated by various agencies. Incessant rain since Saturday night wreaked havoc in Guwahati, leading to knee-deep waterlogging in many areas across the city, while water has touched the chest level at some places. Just imagine being in a place where water is on the chest level, guys. Like, we need to talk about this. Guwahati Municipal Corporation Commissioner Devashish Sharma told reporters that the sluice gates on Baharalu River have been shut. Quote, due to heavy rain in Upper Assam and flowing of excess water through the Brahmaputra, the water level of this river in Guwahati has risen considerably. Its level is now above that of its tributary Baharalu. To stop backflow of Brahmaputra water into the city, the administration has closed all the sluice gates of the Baharalu and lifeline of the lifeline of Guwahati city. Baharalu is the lifeline of Guwahati city. That's something I didn't know. Quote, this led to flooding of new areas in the city. During the last few days, we were able to pump out flood waters to Baharalu, but today we are not able to do so. Flooding was reported from Zoo Road, RG Barua Road, Nabin Nagar, Anil Nagar, Hatigaon, Lachit Nagar, Tarun Nagar, Jyoti Kuchi, Gora Mara, VIP Road, Chandmari and other areas. According to the daily flood report of the ASDMA, 8 people lost their lives in various places due to the flood waters. The death toll in this year's flood and landslides across the state has gone up to 62, it said. Meanwhile, fresh landslides were reported from Chachar, Dima Hasao, Golpara, Helakandi, Kamrup Metropolitan, Karimanganj, South Salamara districts. During the last 24 hours, the state recorded an average rainfall of 37.2 mm. As per the Central Water Commission Bulletin, the mighty Brahmaputra is flowing above danger marks at Nimata Ghat in Jorghat, Tezpur, in Sontipur, Golpara and Dhubri towns. The Barak River at BP Ghat in Karimanganj, AP Ghat in Chachar and Matizuri in Halikandi and its tributary Khushiara at Karimganj town are flowing above danger levels. We hear of these flood situations ever so often from the northeast area, and it is quite a tragedy that people have to lose their lives. So many people have to be rehabilitated, and there is a huge loss to the economy as well every time these floods happen. And I think the mainstream media has completely forgotten about this tragedy, and it is not really talked about because we are so distracted by news that is not really, leading to any solutions. And unfortunately, our northeastern areas are often forgotten and not talked about. I really hope and pray, and also really wish that we find a solution and the flood situation in Assam gets better sometime soon. Moving on, I'm sure a lot of you know that the markets have been crashing. Yes, if you've been investing in the markets and you follow the markets, you have 100% seen the huge amounts of capital loss that many investors have faced over the world, actually, like especially with the increase in interest rates after 2 years since the pandemic hit. And now we have a situation which is a report by the RBI, none other than the Reserve Bank of India, which says that there might be a, quote, black swan event that could trigger around 7.8 lakh crore outflow from the Indian equity market. And this is really concerning, especially for a lot of investors, not just older, but also a lot of new equity investors that joined in during the pandemic when the equities were booming because the interest rates were not that appealing. They were quite low, and the capital inflow was happening into the Indian economy from outside. But now we have the foreign portfolio investors moving out, and that is leading to a big catastrophic situation into the Indian equities. And 7.8 lakh crore outflow situation could be disastrous for the equity markets. And I don't want to do any fear mongering here. I'm just reading a report by George Matthew, and it is about the RBI report, which talks about the Black Swan event. Capital outflows to the tune of $100 billion, around 77 lakh 80,000 crores, are likely to take place from India in a major global risk scenario, or a Black Swan event, as the RBI said. Reserves RBI study said. There is a 5% chance of portfolio outflows from India on the order of 3.2% of the GDP, or $100 billion in a year, in a response to COVID type contraction in real GDP growth, or a GFC, global financial crisis type decline in interest rate differentials, vis-a-vis the US, or a GFC type, which is global financial crisis type surge in volatility index, the RBI study said. In an extreme risk scenario, or a black swan event, in which there is a combination of all these shocks, there is a 5% chance of outflows under the portfolio investments of 7.7% of GDP, and the short-term trade credit retrenchment of 3.9% of GDP, said the RBI study on capital flows at risk. According to the RBI report, these estimates assume significance when assessed against the total stock of portfolio investments in India of 288 billion and short-term trade credit of 110 billion at the end of December 2021. Quote, "This is indicative of the level of liquid reserves that need to be maintained at all times. In addition to standard metrics of import and debt servicing cover, to quell bouts of instability that volatile capital flows can impose in a dynamic and highly uncertain global setting in which pandemic supply chains disruptions and elevated commodity prices and geopolitical tensions keep interacting and intertwining." According to NSDL data, foreign portfolio investors have pulled out a record 2,08,587 crores from the Indian markets in calendar year 2022 so far, and it's just been 6 months. 2 lakh crores have already been pulled out. Of this, as much as 1,98,000 crores was withdrawn from the stock markets in the wake of the global monetary tightening led by the US Federal Reserve to tame inflation and the negative impact of the Ukraine war. Stock markets have plummeted by around 17% since October 2021 peak of the indices, largely on account of FPI withdrawals. Soaring inflation in the US and other advanced economies is likely to lead to more rate hikes in these countries, analysts say. With the spate of emerging market crises since the 1990s and the experience with the global financial crisis and its aftermath, attention has turned from the benefits associated with capital flows to their consequences, such as accentuating financial vulnerabilities, aggravating macroeconomic instability, and spreading contagion. For India, portfolio flows are the most sensitive to shifts in risk sentiment globally and spillovers. Equity flows have tended to be more volatile than debt flows and associated with large outflows during the global financial crisis, the taper tantrum, the US presidential election of 2016, and COVID-19. The report said the debt flows turned negative with the onset of the pandemic. The tapering announcement by the US Fed in May 2013 led to heavy outflows by foreign portfolio investors from both equity and debt markets, and especially from debt segment. Similarly, global risk aversion driven by the outcome of the US presidential elections and expectations of an increase in the federal funds rate culminated in the intense selling pressure in equity and debt segments from November 2016 through January 2017. Basically, the stock market is crashing, and the real question that lies for a lot of people is, should you buy the dip? Especially young people, man, we always think that, the markets have fallen, so maybe I should start buying stocks. And, to this, I would like to, read an article by Sujit Narayan, who talks about if you're planning to buy the dip, important investment tips millennials should know to actually become rich and not go broke when you start to think of making a lot of money without knowing the fundamentals and your own reality. Millennials have really turned the rules upside down, especially when it comes to investing. We've had a record number of demat accounts opened over the past 2 years. A lot of these were first-time millennial investors who were ready to take the plunge into the stock market. Internationally, we've seen investor movements like GameStop and meme coins that were driven essentially by millennial interest. There's no doubt that this generation has come a long way from fixed deposits and gold. But simply buying the dip is not end all be all of investing. Good financial planning calls for addressing your current finances in a way that benefits you in the long term, while also taking care of the short term. So, for a generation that likes to do things its own way, here are some quad guidelines, not rules, to financial planning. Building a risk appetite. Anyone invested in stocks before and during the lockdown of March 2020 must have seen their investments crumble to pieces. It might have seemed like a good idea at the time to cut your losses and sell, and those who held on and continued investing saw returns over the year like never before. Buy low and sell high is a piece of advice that gets thrown around quite often. And while it does sound nice, it's easier said than done. Volatility is simply a part of how markets work, and it's unpredictable by nature. As any seasoned investor will tell you, timing the market is next to impossible. So it's better to stick around to steady investment plans rather than getting caught in decision paralysis. Millennials have a good 20 to 30 years of earning capacity ahead of them. So if there ever was a time to take on some risk, then this is it. A healthy risk appetite along with some solid research will help you navigate choppy waters. But it's not just about investing in equity. Building a healthy risk appetite involves a bit more financial discipline. Addressing your finances. To take a risk, you should first be in a position to take a risk. What that means is you don't want to be dabbling too much in the stock market when you have loans or other financial liabilities to pay off. That being said, it also doesn't mean that you hold off from investing altogether. You must find a balance between the two. Learning to manage debt and liabilities or other financial obligations during the initial years of your career is an important part of building a credible portfolio. Paying off a loan calls for some amount of discipline and probably even sacrifice. One way is to optimize your planned expenditure to prioritize clearing off any debt. Once you are on this path, even the process of regularly clearing off your debts can provide a sense of financial security. If you don't have any loans or obligations, then focus on making a habit of saving money. Make use of online tools to track expenditures, income, and budget accordingly. This should be the foundation of your risk-taking capacity, whether you identify as an aggressive, moderate, or conservative investor. You have to be able to deal with emergencies, guys. Financial security is not simply about having a lot of money stashed away. It is the ability to deal with any financial exigency, or in short, resilience. It is as much a mindset as it is about having adequate liquid assets to fall back on when the going gets tough. And since it forms the bedrock of financial security, building an emergency fund should be a priority in any financial plan. There are no fixed rules when it comes to emergency funds. It all depends on what you define as being financially secure. For some, it might be about getting by with the bare necessities. For others, it could be about maintaining a certain lifestyle. You might have heard that an emergency fund should ideally cover at least 3 months worth of expenses, but this can be stretched to 6 months or even a year or two depending on how you perceive emergencies and what makes you feel secure. Given the nature of this particular fund, it's best to stay away from risky instruments. Highly liquid and safe investments such as short duration debt funds are one option to build an emergency fund. And although not an investment, one cannot talk about emergencies without mentioning insurance. And suddenly a hefty medical bill can take years off your investment plans. Consider getting insured as part of building up to risk-taking positions. Earlier the better. And finally, building a credible portfolio. One of the most important things, a credible portfolio. Any millennial's portfolio should have substantial exposure to equity, but equity exposure can come in many different forms. If you're just getting started, there's no need to get overwhelmed with the information overload. Index mutual funds have practically become a no-brainer today and should form the core part of your equity investments. The Indian market has never lost your money over a 10-year horizon if you invested in the broad market index. That being said, it is important to diversify your portfolio. Investing in debt mutual funds and other assets like gold or bonds can balance the risk involved in equity exposure. Even within the equity, you can diversify your allocation across focused funds and market sectors to avoid concentration risk. And as your portfolio grows, you can consider geographical diversification by investing in foreign stocks. All of this will be underpinned by your understanding of risk and return. It's not as simple as high risk, high return. You must take into account your overall financial situation, your debts and obligations, your future goals, and your perception of the external environment. Some amount of introspection would certainly do no harm in helping you understand where you lie on the risk-return spectrum. This will also help you manage your emotions in the time of high market volatility. Managing emotions, guys, one of the most important things. And last but not the least, don't forget about taxes. Man, these taxes, dude, the government taxes you like crazy. Isn't that true? We all feel that. Any financial planning is incomplete without the mention of taxes. They can affect returns in a big way, but optimizing your investments can reduce the impact. The tax system is structured to prioritize long-term investments. From the 3-year lock-in period of equity-linked savings schemes (ELSS) to the exit when you turn 60 policy of the National Pension Scheme, there are multiple instruments to save tax. Each serves a different purpose and comes with varying degrees of tax efficiency. Efficiency? Yes. But while making full use of Section 80C tax deductions, remember to do this in a way that benefits your long-term goals. When you're at the end of the financial year, it can be tempting to invest purely to save on your tax outgo, but doing so can adversely impact another part of your portfolio. So it's best to take a comprehensive view when optimizing your investments for taxes. Hopefully, this has given you a framework on how to think about finances as opposed to setting the rules of the game in stone. Taking the points discussed here into consideration should help you make more informed financial decisions. And along with steady and regular investments through SIPs, they should help guide you through the long-term process of wealth creation. Yes! May we all be extremely rich, happy, and secure. That's the most important thing. And yeah, man, it's quite a journey life, you know. We all want to be rich, we all want to be happy, we all want to have, you know, something going on for ourselves that makes us feel satisfied and, you know, leads us to a good outcome in life. Emotions, love, hate, jealousy, generosity, arson, destruction, floods, economy, so many things, red walls in front of me. This world is amazing, dude. And just want to take a moment to, you know, really thank everyone for listening in. And if you have any feedback for the podcast, please do let me know. I would love to inculcate it. I would love to listen to you. Please do get active on the comments. I've been hearing a little bit from you guys, so it's kind of nice, and you know, I genuinely really appreciate all the support. Share it with your friends if you want to, if you feel there's some value in this. Much love to everyone. Signing out of the NancoVerse, and many kisses and hugs to everyone out here. Mwah. Take care, guys. Have a good one.